Roger's dead. Yes, Roger's dead. Live video. Do 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 do. Roger is so very dead. Roger, he is so very dead. Roger. Roger's dead, yes, Roger's dead. Roger's dead, get it through your head. Roger's dead, yes, Roger's dead. That's what I said. Roger's dead. Okay, yesterday the stream got cut off a little prematurely, so I'm going to start with the back end of chapter 22. And I hope you're all comfortable. I hope you're snuggled in, ready to go to sleep. I won't be offended in the slightest if you go to sleep. And yeah, so we're going to get started here soon. So let me get there it is. So I'm going to read from the point after, in chapter 22, when where basically he describes what is going on, and hopefully we can get to the end of the book today. I think that'd be pretty cool. You know what, I'm just going to do chapter 22, so let's just do it. We'll do it again because it got cut off last time. Chapter 22, Ursula's story. We'll go to the part where she's already admitted that she's married to Ralph Patton. And if you're on TikTok, and it's having trouble connecting, I apologize. There's just not much I can do about it. Oh, anyway. All right, here we go. The back end of 22, on to the end, hopefully. All right. Ursula Bourne, it seemed, was one of a family of 7, impoverished Irish gentlefolk. On the death of her father, most of the girls were cast out into the world to earn their own living. Ursula's eldest sister was married to Captain Folliot. It was she whom I had seen that Sunday, and the cause of her embarrassment was clear enough now. Determined to earn her living and not attracted to the idea of being a nursery governess, the one profession open to an untrained girl, Ursula preferred the job of parlor maid. She scorned to label herself a lady parlor maid. She would be the real thing, her reference being supplied by her sister. At Fernley, despite an aloofness which, as has been seen, caused some comment, she was a success at her job, quick, competent, and thorough. I enjoyed the work, she explained, and I had plenty of time to myself. And then came her meeting with Ralph Patton and the love affair which culminated in a secret marriage. Ralph had persuaded her into that, somewhat against her will. She had declared that his stepfather would not hear of his marrying a penniless girl. Better to be married secretly, and break the news to him at some later and more favorable minute. And so the deed was done. Ursula Bourne became Ursula Patton. Ralph was declared that he meant to pay off his debts, find a job, and then, when he was in a position to support her, and independent of his adopted father, they would break the news to him. But to people like Ralph Patton, turning over a new leaf is easier in theory than in practice. He hoped that his stepfather, whilst still ignorant of the marriage, might be persuaded to pay his debts and put him on his feet again. But the revelation of the amount of Ralph's liabilities merely enraged Roger Ackroyd, and he refused to do anything at all. Some months passed, and then Ralph was bidden once more to Fernley. Roger Ackroyd did not beat about the bush. It was the desire of his heart that Ralph should marry Flora, and he put the matter plainly before the young man. And here it was that innate weakness of Ralph Patten showed itself. As always, he grasped at the easy, the immediate solution. As far as I could make out, neither Flora nor Ralph made any pretense of love. It was, on both sides, a business arrangement. Roger Ackroyd dictated his wishes. They agreed to him. They agreed to them. Flora accepted a chance of liberty, money, and an enlarged horizon. Ralph, of course, was playing a different game, but he was in a very awkward hole financially. He seized at the chance. His debts would be paid. He could start again with a clean sheet. He was not a nature to envisage the future, but I gathered that he saw vaguely the engagement with Flora being broken off after a decent interval had elapsed. Both Flora and he stipulated that it should be kept a secret for the present. He was anxious to conceal it from Ursula. He felt instinctively that her nature, strong and resolute, with an inherent distaste for duplicity, was not one to welcome such a course. Then came the crucial moment when Roger Ackroyd, always high-handed, decided to announce the engagement. He said no word of his intention to Ralph, only to Flora, and Flora, apathetic, raised no objection. On Ursula the news fell like a bombshell. Summoned by her, Ralph came hurriedly down from town. They met in the wood, where part of the conversation was overheard by my sister. Ralph implored her to keep silent for a little while longer. Ursula was equally determined to have done with the concealments. She would tell Mr. Ackroyd the truth without any further delay. Husband and wife parted acrimoniously. Ursula, steadfast in her purpose, sought an interview with Roger Ackroyd that very afternoon and revealed the truth to him. Their interview was a stormy one. It might have been even more stormy had Roger Ackroyd had not already been obsessed with his own troubles. It was bad enough, however. Ackroyd was not the kind of man to forgive the deceit that had been practiced upon him. His rancor was mainly directed to Ralph, but Ursula came in for her share, since he regarded her as a girl who had deliberately tried to entrap the adopted son of a very wealthy man. Unforgivable things were said on both sides. That same evening, Ursula met Ralph by appointment in the small summer house, stealing out from the house by the side door in order to do so. Their interview was made up of reproaches on both. Ursula with having irretrievably ruined his prospects by her ill-timed revelation. Ursula reproached Ralph with his duplicity. They parted at last. A little over half an hour later came the discovery of Roger Ackroyd's body. Since that night, Ursula had neither seen nor heard from Ralph. As the story unfolded itself, I realized more and more what a damning series of facts it was. Alive, Ackroyd could hardly have failed to alter his will. I knew him well enough to realize that to do so would be his first thought. His death came in the nick of time for Ralph and Ursula Patten. Small wonder the girl had held her tongue and played her part so consistently. My meditations were interrupted. It was Poirot's voice speaking, and I knew from the gravity of his tone that he too was fully alive to the implications of the position. Mademoiselle, I must ask you one question, and you must answer it truthfully, for on it everything must hang. What time was it when you parted from Captain Ralph Patten in this summer house? Now take a little minute so that your answer may be very exact. The girl gave half a laugh. Bitter enough in all conscience. Do you think I haven't gone over that again and again in my own mind? It was just 9:30 when I went out to meet him. Major Blunt was walking up and down the terrace, so I had to go round through the bushes to avoid him. It must have been about 27 minutes to 10 when I reached the summer house. Ralph was waiting for me. I was with him 10 minutes, not longer, for it was just 9:45 when I got back to the house. I saw now the insistence of her question the other day. If only Ackroyd could have been proved to have been killed before 9:45 and not after. I saw the reflection of that thought in Poirot's next question. Who left this summer house first? I did. Leaving Ralph Patten in the summer house? Yes, but you don't think, Mademoiselle, it is of no importance what I think. What did you do when you got back to the house? I went up to my room and stayed there until then. Until 10 o'clock. Is there anyone who can prove that? Prove? That I was in my room, you mean? Oh, no. But surely... Oh, I see. They might think... I saw the dawning horror in her eyes. Poirot finished the sentence for her. That it was you who entered by the window and stabbed Mr. Ackroyd as he sat in his chair. Yes, they might just think that. Nobody but a fool would think anything such a thing, said Caroline indignantly. She patted Ursula on the shoulder. The girl had her face hidden in her hands. Horrible, she was murmuring. Horrible. Caroline gave her a friendly shake. Don't worry, my dear. Monsieur Poirot doesn't really think that. As for that husband of yours, I don't think much of him, and I'll tell you so candidly, running away and leaving you to face the music. But Ursula shook her head energetically. Oh, no, she cried. It wasn't like that at all. Ralph would not run away on his own account. I see now. If he heard of his stepfather's murder, he might think himself that I had done it. He wouldn't think any such thing, said Caroline. I was so cruel to him that night, so hard and bitter. I wouldn't listen to what he was trying to say. I wouldn't believe that he really cared. I just stood there telling him what I thought of him and saying the coldest, cruelest things that came to mind, trying my best to hurt him. Do him no harm, said Caroline. Never worry about what you say to a man. They're so conceited that they never believe you mean it if it's unflattering. Ursula went on nervously twisting and untwisting her hands. When the murder was discovered and he didn't come forward, I was terribly upset. Just for a moment I wondered, but then I knew he couldn't. He couldn't. But I wished he would come forward and say openly that he had nothing to do with it. I knew that he was fond of Dr. Shepherd, and I fancied that perhaps Dr. Shepherd might know where he was hiding. She turned to me. That's why I said what I did to you the other day. I thought if you knew where he was, you might pass on the message to him. I exclaimed. Why should James know where he was? Demanded Caroline sharply. It was very unlikely, I know, admitted Ursula. But Ralph had often spoke of Dr. Shepherd, and I knew that he would be likely to consider him as his best friend in King's Abbot. My dear child, I said, I have not the least idea where Ralph Patten is at the present moment. That is true enough, said Poirot. But, Ursula held out the newspaper cutting in a puzzled fashion. Ah, that, said Poirot, embarrassed. A bagatelle, mademoiselle. A rien du tout. Not for a moment do I believe that Ralph Patten has been arrested. But then, began the girl slowly, Poirot went on quickly. There is one thing I should like to know. Did Captain Patten wear shoes or boots that night? Ursula shook her head. I can't remember. A pity. But how should you? Now, madame, he smiled at her, his head on one side, his forefinger wagging eloquently. No questions. And do not torment yourself. Be of good courage, and place your faith in Hercule Poirot. I love that. All right. Now we're on to chapter 23. So now Poirot's going to get, is going to start going in for the kill. Pardon the pun. Chapter 23, Poirot's Little Reunion. And now, said Caroline, rising, that child is coming upstairs to lie down. Don't you worry, my dear. Monsieur Poirot will do everything he can for you. Be sure of that. I ought to go back to Fernley, said Ursula uncertainly. But Caroline silenced her protests with a firm hand. Nonsense. You're in my hands for the time being. You'll stay here for the present anyway. Eh, Monsieur Poirot? It will be the best plan, agreed the little Belgian. This evening I shall want Mademoiselle, I beg her pardon, Madame, to attend my little reunion. Because she's married. 9 o'clock at my house. It is most necessary that she should be there. Caroline nodded and went with Ursula out of the room. The door shut behind them. Poirot dropped down into a chair again. So far, so good, he said. Things are straightening themselves out. They're getting to look blacker and blacker against Ralph Patton, I observed gloomily. Poirot nodded. Yes, this is so. But it was to be expected, was it not? I looked at him, slightly puzzled by the remark. He was leaning back in the chair, his eyes half closed, the tips of his fingers just touching each other. Suddenly, he sighed and shook his head. What is it? I asked. It is that there are moments when a great longing for my friend Hastings comes over me. That is the friend of whom I spoke to you, the one who resides now in Argentine. Always when I have had a big case, he has been at my side, and he has helped me. Yes, often he has helped me. For he had the knack, the one of stumbling over the truth unawares, without noticing it himself. Bien entendu. Bien entendu. At times, he said something particularly foolish, and behold, that foolish remark reveals the truth to me. And then, too, it was his practice to keep a written record of the cases that proved interesting. I gave a slightly embarrassed cough. As far as that goes, I began and then stopped. Poirot sat upright in his chair. His eyes sparkled. But yes, what is it that you would say? Well, as a matter of fact, I've read some of Captain Hastings' narratives, and I thought, why not try my hand at something of the kind? Seemed a pity not to. Unique opportunity, probably the only time I'll be mixed up with anything of this kind. I felt myself getting hotter and more incoherent as I floundered above the speech. Poirot sprang from his chair. I had a moment's terror that he was going to embrace me French fashion, but mercifully he refrained. But this is magnificent. You have then written down your impressions of the case as you went along? I nodded. Épatant! Cried Poirot. Let me see them, this instant. I was not quite prepared for such a demand. I racked my brains to remember certain details. I hope you don't mind, I stammered. I may have been a little personal now and then. Oh, I comprehend perfectly. You have referred to me as comic, as perhaps ridiculous sometimes. It is a matter of none. Hastings, he also was not always polite. Me, I have the mind above such trivialities. Still somewhat doubtful, I rummaged in the drawers of my desk and produced an untidy pile of manuscript, which I handed over to him. With an eye on possible publication in the future, I had divided the work into chapters, and the night before I had brought it up to date with an account of Miss Russell's visit. Poirot had therefore 20 chapters. I left him with them. I was obliged to go out to case at some distance away, and it was past 8 o'clock when I got back, to be greeted with a plate of hot dinner on a tray, and the announcement that Poirot and my sister had supped together at 7:30, and that the former had then gone to my workshop to finish reading of the manuscript. I hope, James, said my sister, that you've been careful in what you say about me in it. My jaw dropped. I had not been careful at all. Not that it matters very much, said Caroline, reading my expression correctly. Monsieur Poirot will know what to think. He understands me much better than you do. I went into the workshop. Poirot was sitting by the window, the manuscript laid neatly piled on a chair beside him. He laid his hands on it and spoke. Eh bien, he said, I congratulate you on your modesty. Oh? I said, rather taken back. And on your reticence, he added. I said, oh, again. Not so did Hastings write, continued my friend. On every page, many times, the word I, what he thought, what he did. But you have kept your personality in the background. Only once or twice does it obtrude. In scenes of home life, shall we say. I blushed a little before the twinkle of his eyes. Well, what do you really think of the stuff? I asked nervously. You want my candid opinion? Yes. Poirot laid his jesting manner aside. A very meticulous and accurate account, he said kindly. You have recorded all the facts faithfully and exactly, though you have shown yourself becoming reticent as to your own share in them. And it has helped you? Yes, I may say that it has helped me considerably. Come, we must go over to my house and set the stage for my little performance. Caroline was in the hall. I think she hoped that she mightn't be invited to accompany us. Poirot dealt with the situation tactfully. I should very much like to have you present, mademoiselle, he said regretfully, but at this juncture it would not be wise. See you, all these people tonight are suspects. Amongst them I shall find the person who killed Mr. Ackroyd. You really believe that? I said incredulously. I see that you do not, said Poirot dryly. Not yet do you appreciate Hercule Poirot at his true worth. At that minute, Ursula came down the staircase. You are ready, my child, said Poirot. That is good. We will go to my house together. Mademoiselle Caroline, believe me, I do everything possible to render your service. Good evening. We went off, leaving Caroline rather like a dog who has been refused a walk, standing on the front doorstep gazing after us. Oh man, I feel bad for her. The sitting room at the Larches had been gotten ready. On the table were various syrups and glasses. Also a plate of biscuits. That's cookies. Several chairs had been brought in from the other room. Poirot ran to and fro, rearranging things, pulling out a chair here, altering the position of a lamp there, occasionally stooping to straighten one of the mats that covered the floor. He was specially fussing over the lighting. The lamps were arranged in such a way as to throw a clear light on the side of the room where the chairs were grouped, at the same time leaving the other end of the room where I presumed Poirot himself would sit, in a dim twilight. Ursula and I watched him. Presently, a bell was heard. They arrive, said Poirot. Good. All is in readiness. The door opened and the party from Fernley filed in. Poirot went forward and greeted Mrs. Ackroyd, and Flora. It is most good of you to come, he said, and Major Blunt and Mr. Raymond. Wow, it's like an episode of Clue. Awesome. The secretary was debonair as ever. What's the great idea? He said, laughing. Some scientific machine? Do we have bands round our wrists which register guilty heartbeats? There is such an invention, isn't there? I have read of it, yes, admitted Poirot, but me, I am old-fashioned. I use the old methods. I work only with the little gray cells. Now let us begin. But first, I have an announcement to make to you all. He took Ursula's hand and drew her forward. This lady is Mrs. Ralph Patton. She was married to Captain Patton last March. A little shriek burst from Mrs. Ackroyd. Ralph? Married? Last March? Oh, but it's absurd. How could it be? She stared at Ursula as though she had never seen her before. Married to Bourne? She said. Really, Monsieur Poirot, I don't believe you. Ursula flushed and began to speak, but Flora forestalled her. Going quickly to the other girl's side, she passed her hand through her arm. You must not mind our being surprised, she said. You see, we had no idea of such a thing. You and Ralph have kept your secret very well. I am very glad about it. You are very kind, Miss Ackroyd, said Ursula in a low voice, and you have every right to be exceedingly angry. Ralph behaved very badly, especially to you. You needn't worry about that, said Flora, giving her arm a consoling little pat. Ralph was in a corner and took the only way out. I should probably have done the same in his place. I do think he might have trusted me with the secret, though. I wouldn't have let him down. Poirot rapped gently on a table and cleared his throat significantly. The board meeting's going to begin, said Flora. Monsieur Poirot hints that we mustn't talk. But just tell me one thing. Where is Ralph? You must know if anyone does. But I don't, cried Ursula almost in a wail. That's just it, I don't. Isn't he detained at Liverpool? Asked Raymond. It said so in the paper. He is not at Liverpool, said Poirot shortly. In fact, I remarked, no one knows where he is. Except Hercule Poirot, eh? said Raymond. Poirot replied seriously to the other's banter. I know everything. Remember that. Geoffrey Raymond lifted his eyebrows. Everything? He whistled. Whew, that's a tall order. Do you mean to say you could really guess where Ralph Patton is hiding? I asked incredulously. You call it guessing. I call it knowing, my friend. In Cranchester? I hazarded. No, replied Poirot gravely, not in Cranchester. He said no more, but at a gesture from him, the assembly party took their seats. As they did so, the door opened once more, and two other people came in and sat down near the door. They were Parker and the housekeeper. The number is complete, said Poirot. Everyone is here. Oh, hey there, found dead in Hollywood. Nice name. Welcome in. He said no more, but at a gesture from him, the assembled party took their seats. As they did so, the door opened once more, and two other people came in and sat down near the door. They were Parker and the housekeeper. The number is complete, said Poirot. Everyone is here. There was a ring of satisfaction in his tone, and with the sound of it, I saw a ripple of something like uneasiness pass over all those faces grouped at the end of the room. There was a suggestion in all of this of being a trap that had closed. Poirot read from a list in an important manner. Mrs. Ackroyd, Miss Flora Ackroyd, Major Blount, Mr. Geoffrey Raymond, Mrs. Ralph Patton, John Parker, Elizabeth Russell. He laid down the paper on the table. What's the meaning of all this? Began Raymond. The list I have just read, said Poirot, is a list of suspected persons. Every one of you present at the opportunity to kill Mr. Ackroyd. With a cry, Mrs. Ackroyd sprang up, her throat working. I don't like it, she wailed. I don't like it. I would much prefer to go home. You cannot go home, madame, said Poirot sternly, until you have heard what I have to say. He paused a moment, then cleared his throat. I will start at the beginning. When Miss Ackroyd asked me to investigate the case, I went up to Fernley Park, Dr. Shepherd. I walked with him along the terrace where I was shown the footprints of the windowsill. From there, Inspector Raglan took me along the path which leads to the drive. My eye was caught by a little summer house, and I searched it thoroughly. I found two things, a scrap of starched cambric and an empty goose quill. A scrap of cambric immediately suggested to me a maid's apron. When Inspector Raglan showed me his list of the people in his house, I noticed at once that one of the maids, Ursula Bourne, the parlor maid, had no real alibi. According to her own story, she was in her bedroom from 9:30 until 10. But supposing that instead she was in the summer house? If so, she must have gone there to meet someone. Now we know from Dr. Shepherd that someone from outside did come to the house that night. The stranger whom we met just by the gate. At first glance, it would seem that our problem was solved, and that the stranger went to the summer house to meet Ursula Bourne. It was fairly certain that he did go to the summer house because of the goose quill. That suggested at once to my mind a taker of drugs, and one who had acquired the habit on the other side of the Atlantic, where sniffing snow is more common than in this country. The man who Dr. Shepherd met had an American accent, which fitted in that same supposition. But I was held up by one point. The times, they did not fit. Ursula Bourne could certainly not have gone to the summer house before 9:30, whereas the man must have got there by a few minutes past 9. I could, of course, assume that he waited for half an hour. The only alternative supposition was that there had been two separate meetings in the summer house that night. Dun, dun, dun. Eh bien. As soon as I went into the alternative, I found several significant facts. I discovered that Miss Russell, the housekeeper, had visited Dr. Shepherd that morning and had displayed a good deal of interest in cures for victims of the drug habit. Taking that into conjunction with the goose quill, I assumed that the man in question came to Fernley to meet the housekeeper and not Ursula Bourne. Who then did Ursula Bourne come to rendezvous to meet. I was not long in doubt. First, I found a ring, a wedding ring, from R, and a date inside of it. Then I learnt that Ralph Patton had been seen coming up the path which led to the summer house at 25 minutes past 9. And I also heard of a certain conversation which had taken place in a wood near the village that very afternoon. A conversation between Ralph Patton and some unknown girl. So I had my facts succeeding each other in a neat and orderly manner. A secret marriage, and an engagement announced on the day of the tragedy, the stormy interview in the wood, and the meeting arranged for the summer house that night. Incidentally, this proved to me one thing, that both Ralph Patton and Ursula Bourne, or Patton, had the strongest motives for wishing Mr. Ackroyd out of the way. And it also made one of their point unexpectedly clear. It could not have been Ralph Patton who was with Mr. Ackroyd in the study at 9:30. So we come to another and most interesting aspect of the crime. Who was it in the room with Mr. Ackroyd at 9:30? Not Ralph Patton, who was in the summer house with his wife. Not Charles Kent, who had already left. Who then? I posed my cleverest, my most audacious question. Was anyone with him? Poirot leaned forward and shot the last words triumphantly at us, drawing back with the air of one who has made a decided hit. Raymond, however, did not seem impressed and lodged a mild protest. I don't know if you're trying to make me out a liar, Monsieur Poirot, but the matter does not rest on my evidence alone, except perhaps as to the exact words used. Remember, Major Blunt also heard Mr. Ackroyd talking to someone. He was on the terrace outside and couldn't catch the words clearly, but he distinctly heard the voices. Poirot nodded. I have not forgotten, he said quietly, but Major Blunt was under the impression that it was you to whom Mr. Ackroyd was speaking. For a moment, Raymond seemed taken aback. Then he recovered himself. Well, Blunt knows now that he was mistaken, he said. Exactly, agreed the other man. Yet there must have been some reason for thinking so, mused Poirot. Oh, no. He held up his hand in protest. I know the reasons you will give, but it is not enough. We must seek elsewhere. I will put it this way. From the beginning of the case, I have been struck by one thing. The nature of those words which Mr. Raymond overheard. It has been amazing to me that no one has commented on them, has seen anything odd about them. He paused a minute and then quoted softly, The calls on my purse have been so frequent of late that I fear it is impossible for me to accede to your request. Does nothing strike you as odd about that? I don't think so, said Raymond. He has frequently dictated letters to me, using almost exactly those same words. Exactly, cried Poirot. That is what I seek to arrive at. Would any man use such a phrase in talking to another? Impossible that he should be part of a real conversation with that. Now, if he had been dictating a letter... You mean he was reading a letter aloud? Said Raymond slowly. Even so, he must have been reading to someone. But why? We have no evidence that there was anyone else in the room. No other voice but Mr. Ackroyd's was heard, remember? Surely a man wouldn't read letters of that type aloud to himself, not unless he was, well, going balmy. You have all forgotten one thing, said Poirot softly. The stranger who called at the house the preceding Wednesday. They all stared at him. But yes, said Poirot, nodding encouragingly, on Wednesday, the young man was not of himself important, but the firm he represented interested me very much. The Dictaphone Company, gasped Raymond. The Dictaphone Company?